Former Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Farouk Yahaya, who recently retired from the Army after 35 years in service, has said the exploits of the Nigerian Army has put the country's adversary in disarray on all fronts. Nigeria's new Chief of Defense Staff, CDS, Major General Christopher Musa, and the Chief of Army Staff, Major General Abiodun Lagbaja, and the Chief of Naval Staff, Rear Admiral Ikechukwu Ogala, at the weekend participated in a traditional pulling out ceremony for Yahaya. The Nigerian Army pull-out parade ceremony is in line with the military tradition of honoring retiring senior officers of the rank of general who served without blemish. Yahaya, in his remarks at the event, says the anti-illegal oil bunkering operations being conducted by troops in the Niger Delta region has continued to yield positive results with a attendant increment in oil production, which returned the countries to the top of the list of oil-producing nations in Africa. He charged Nigerian Army personnel not to relent in providing support to the new Chief of Army Staff to ensure a successful execution of the constitutional responsibilities of the Nigerian Army. A lot to talk about.
Yes, good morning, and congratulations to the immediate past Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Farouk Yahaya. As you've mentioned, Rufai, 35 years of meritorious service, and this was an opportunity for him to reflect on the achievements and successes of his time and tenure, not just as an army officer, but also as the Chief of Army Staff in Nigeria. Some of the successes he highlighted, the first being the Northeast, the successes that the Army had recorded in the Northeast through kinetic and non-kinetic means, and also as what he's described as the pushing back of oil bunkering in the South and the achievements they've made. I'm glad that he didn't quite take credit for the total defeat or the total success in those areas, because it's still a work in progress and it is work that he would be transferring, or perhaps his successor would be taking up those responsibilities. When we look at the pulling out ceremony of the former Chief of Army Staff, it's an opportunity for us to also reflect on the security situation in the past administration and perhaps some lessons that can be learned for this new administration and, very importantly, the new Chief of Army Staff. In talking about the Northeast, we must give kudos and credit to where it is due. As he'd mentioned, he's talked about the fact that a number of terrorists and bandits had surrendered in the course. Yes, some people might criticize the way it was handled, especially the area of amnesty to some bandits and how they were said to be, to be absorbed into the, to be part of the security architecture and the likes. But in the Northeast, you would say that in agreement with him, they have been able to record relative peace and stability. And if you'd go to the Northeast, you would realize that in many parts of the Northeast, normal life, trade activities, economic activities have resumed. And so we must give him kudos for that. With regards to the South, on the other hand, unfortunately, that isn't a war, in quotes, that he would beat his chest and say they've won, because there's still a big challenge there whereby the new Chief of Army Staff and, of course, the new security chiefs would have to look into. Beyond that, and beyond recording his successes, let's talk about the other areas where they hadn't quite made or achieved record success. Look at kidnapping. We still have quite a big issue in that area. We look at the handling of the Southeast conflict, particularly with IPOB and the Nnamdi Kanu issue. That, again, comes under criticism. We also look at the spate of banditry, farmer-headed clashes, the insecurity in Benue State, insecurity in Kaduna State. And so in praising his efforts and giving him kudos for 35 years of a very good record, we must also highlight areas in which the new Chief of Army Staff must look into. And in concluding, I'd like to point out the fact that when it comes to security matters, it's not just kinetic forces that should be employed, as he'd mentioned in his speech. I'm hoping that the new Chief of Army Staff would employ a more holistic approach to tackling insecurity, which I'm sure his predecessor had used, but even a bit more. So we're talking about involving community members, involving traditional leaders, involving the locals in fighting insecurity. Beyond that as well is also perhaps other non-kinetic factors, education, community involvement, uplifting the community, providing amenities in those areas. These work hand in hand with kinetic forces when it comes to tackling insecurity. Again, congratulations to the former Chief of Army Staff, and welcome to the new Chief of Army Staff, and hopefully some lessons learned that we can take forward.
Dr. Bati?
Well, congratulations to Lieutenant General Farouk Yahaya, who is leaving the service after putting in 35 years. He said he started his military career in 1975 as part of this 37th regular course at the Nigerian Defense Academy. And in 35 years.
85.
Is it 85? 35 years.
35 years.
He spent 35 years.
Okay.
NDA in 35.
NDA. You know, so he has spent 35 years in service, and in any case, President Tinubu has changed the service chiefs. And he says, look, he's grateful to God that he couldn't have achieved everything he achieved without the grace of God. He's been commander here, he's been battalion leader, and imagine as the 22nd Chief of Army Staff of Nigeria. And he credits himself, apart from paying tribute to God Almighty and to friends and family, he credited himself with having promoted professionalism in the Nigerian army. Well, I guess, you know, that is something for other people who are, you know, within that bracket to, you know, determine whether indeed the army that is leaving behind is more professional than he met it when he assumed office as Chief of Army Staff. Yes, he talked about, you know, efforts that have been made, particularly in the South, in Niger Delta. He says all adversaries have been put in disarray. Well, who are these adversaries? He identifies them as oil thieves in the Niger Delta, and says as a result of the anti-oil theft activities of the Nigerian military, Nigeria now has increased oil production. But there are, of course, other challenges that have not been dealt with. The issue of terrorism is still there. The issue of banditry is still there. Random kidnapping of Nigerians is still there. General insecurity is still there. But without any doubt, yes, the Nigerian military did so much under his watch, to the extent that we began to complain in certain instances about using the military to do police work. And that, look, the police should do more of the work. But in any case, the Constitution allows, you know, Nigeria to call out, you know, the military even when there are emergencies within the country. But using the military for internal security purposes will probably not be the golden standard in that regard. And then, of course, he struck a good note when he paid tribute to many of his colleagues who are fallen heroes, who died in the course of service. And I thought that that was a very good point to make. And then finally, the point he made about the fact that, look, what he has done during his tenure, and that's one regard in which I thought he sounded, you know, he showed humility, that what he has tried to do is to create platforms, you know, lay a foundation that his successor, you know, can build upon. And indeed, there's a lot for, you know, the newly appointed Chief of Army Staff. There's a lot to be done, because the job of ensuring security in Nigeria, either the territorial integrity of the country or the safety of lives and property, is not done. It's a continuing responsibility. And the question in this regard is, will President Tinubu be able to solve the challenge of insecurity in the country, where a former military head of state who became civilian president failed? That's the big question out there. And we all recall that President Tinubu has charged the new service chiefs to ensure synergy, to ensure collaboration. And we have seen, you know, the new service chiefs themselves promising a lot that they will be able to also make a difference. This morning, the Inspector General of Police, for example, is meeting with about 79, you know, mobile police force squadrons, you know, MOPOL commanders across the country. And he is also expressing commitment. It's the same kind of commitment that we expect from all other service chiefs. By all accounts, we were told that the pulling out ceremony was well attended. It was colorful. and, as it should be, because it's traditional military procedure. And then finally, it's important that the Chief of Army Staff has asked for support for the new Chief of Army Staff, because, a commander, a chief, is only as good as those who follow him and who have put their confidence in him. And we hope that the same support that General Yahaya received from the troops, that the new Chief of Army Staff would be given the same level of support for the benefit of our country, Nigeria, and for the benefit of everyone concerned.
So, truth has to be told, congratulations to the incoming and the outgoing. And a lot has to be said as regards insecurity in Nigeria. We entered this new wave a couple of years ago when somebody was killed in Borno. And the killing of this man led to a great level of insurgency. But let's dial back to the 80s. Something happened in the 80s when a riot was started by somebody of Cameroonian extraction, Metseni riots. And after quelling those riots, there was a panel of inquiry set up in the 80s. And that panel of inquiry did say that if we do not stem the tide of poverty in the 80s in the north, that is going to snowball into something bigger. But like we always do in Nigeria, we push the report of that panel of inquiry aside, since we had generals that could come in there and defeat the enemy. Our former president played a major role then. And we just only thought that the way to solve the problem of insecurity was to use force. Then we had the capacity of force because the adversary were pretty much carrying bows and arrows. But that poverty over the years that went unabated, and the bigger political class kept on getting richer at the expense of the poor over the years, prepared a fertile ground for those that wanted to destabilize Nigeria to harvest people to fight for them. And the fertile ground is what you see in banditry, insurgency, and all sorts of crime and criminality. Also, the poverty in other parts of the country has prepared a fertile ground, and the injustices done. And what we are just hoping that the military will do is they will solve hitherto problems that have been there for so many years. Our insecurity challenge is a collective problem to solve. The military can only provide force. But does force completely eradicate the root cause of the problem? It doesn't. And that's why once we say we've decimated a particular group, another one springs up. A couple of years ago, we're not talking about bandits. Today, they are the order of the day. Now, kidnapping has been added to the fray. Now, nationalist movements have sprung up because of the consistent injustices done across the land. And every region had their fair share. We all remember the case of Igboho. So, how do we start to solve the problem? Number one will be about rejigging the security architecture. The military generals can claim victories. Yes, they have done their bit. But have we solved the problem? No. Because when you look at the number of people that have died in a couple of months, it's shocking across the country. So solutions, number one, rejig security architecture, which is quite a very nebulous word. Because for me, the shocking thing about saying rejigging security architecture is the nebulousness of that word itself. But no matter how nebulous it is, we'll have to find a strategy that works. Secondly, looking at the economic outcomes for a lot of people. Thirdly, bringing fairness and justice back to the country. Because it is fairness and justice that can truly quell those agitations. And it goes back to the talk about Nnamdi Kanu. And other people that feel disgruntled in this country. We should always ask, why is it that we have an easy ground for people that feel disgruntled to have people to join them? Have we been fair to ourselves in our union? And it's not today we've been having the problems. Did we ever introspect to ask what made a certain Isaac Adakaboro carry arms against the nation of Nigeria? So until we start to solve the problem of injustices, then the military will just keep punching and fighting with force as much as possible. They'll keep buying armory, pounding. But there is a lack of love in the land. And a land where there's lack of love, the only stream that flows are the streams of blood. We need to bring unity back to our land. And I think that's the deeper issue on the table. We need to have milk and honey flow in Nigeria, no longer the rivers of blood.